Thank you, Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for his passionate speech. I have to say, though, Speaker, I don't really understand where his opposition to this bill is coming from. This Bill C-16 restores mandatory minimum penalties. This is something that he's advocating for. We know that here in Canada, every time the government has tried to impose a mandatory minimum sentence, it gets thrown out by the Supreme Court because in some cases it can violate people's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so Bill C-16 gives us exactly what the Supreme Court has been asking for those very rare cases. For example, if a 17-year-old shares a picture to his friend of an intimate photo of a 16-year-old girlfriend, does that 17-year-old go to prison for 25 years? It's definitely a bad thing he's done. But, Speaker, this bill addresses all of the issues that he just raised.
The honourable member for Elgin St. Thomas, London South.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for at least sort of listening to the speech, but what she missed was me talking about the fact that by embedding a safety valve, by giving judges a tool to disregard mandatory minimums, we are not actually bolstering or expanding those mandatory minimums. Exactly. And that, I think, is the crucial point that we have to acknowledge here, is that if mandatory minimum sentences are to be mandatory, knowing what we have seen, such as with the Senville case, that certain judges entirely desire incredible leniency at the expense of victims and at the expense of public safety. And that's why what we're talking about, and by the way, I have said good things about the bill, but I also can't turn a blind eye to things that move us further away from what we are trying to do.
Well done.
Question et commentaire, l'honorable député de Rivière-du-Nord.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie mon collègue pour son discours. Mon collègue, pour qui j'ai beaucoup de respect, qui travaille très bien au comité justice, un homme respectable et intelligent. Et je voudrais voir avec lui, parce que je comprends ce qu'il reproche sur la question des peines minimales, mais comme le disait notre collègue libéral quelques instants, la Cour suprême les a invalidées, les peines minimales. Alors, on a le choix. Soit on remet les mêmes peines minimales que la Cour suprême a invalidées, puis évidemment, quand on refait la même chose, il faut s'attendre aux mêmes résultats, ils vont être encore annulés. Soit on n'en met pas pantoute. Et là, ben, nos collègues conservateurs ne seront pas contents, puis je les comprends. Mais là, on a une voie de passage entre les deux. On dit on les remet. Et on permet aux juges, non pas de les ignorer, comme mon collègue disait tantôt, mais d'y déroger à ce minimum-là, dans des circonstances exceptionnelles. Et là, ça oblige le tribunal à justifier en quoi ce cas-là est exceptionnel et mérite une exemption à la peine minimale. Je pense, en tout respect, Monsieur le Président, que c'est une voie de passage intéressante et j'aimerais entendre mon confrère là-dessus, mon collègue là-dessus. Est-ce qu'effectivement, entre ça et des peines minimales qu'on sait que la Cour suprême va interdire, est-ce qu'on n'est pas mieux d'y aller avec un aménagement comme celui-là? Merci.
The honourable member for Elgin St. Thomas, London South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his intervention. I've gotten the privilege to work with him on the Justice Committee, and while obviously we don't see eye to eye on some issues, I know that he does have a passion for public safety, and I think that is underscoring the work we need to do on this and any other justice bill. There is a long-standing legal debate in Canada about who ultimately has the authority to make the laws, and I know that, to put it glibly, members of Parliament are called lawmakers for a reason.
Exactly.
It is our job to make laws. It is the Supreme Court's job and the judiciary's job to interpret laws. We have been very clear that there are certain things that are so imperative that if we have judges that are standing in the way of what clearly Canadians want and Canadians deserve, we should be open to using the notwithstanding clause to protect some of these fundamental measures. We've been very clear as a party in saying that. And mandatory minimums for child sexual abusers are a prime example of that. So I think it's very important that we understand that it is our responsibility and our duty as lawmakers to set out criminal code penalties.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Peace River Westlock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague for his great speech on the issue. And sometimes I feel like we don't see the forest for the trees, and this particular bill does some dramatic improvements, but what this fails to take into account is the last decade of Liberal failures on our public judiciary, but also the public safety and just the crime rates in general. I'm just wondering if my honourable colleague could just zoom out a little bit and talk more broadly about the state of affairs in Canada in terms of crime and justice. Thank you, Mr.
The honourable member for Elgin St. Thomas, London South.
Well, thank you very much, and I thank my colleague from Peace River Westlock, my brother's former member of Parliament as it happened, for his intervention. Look, the issues dealing with crime across the board, not just the crime that we're dealing with in the context of Bill C-16, have been rampant. This very quickly became one of the top issues I face from constituents, and in fact, behind affordability and the cost of living, crime is the top issue that my constituents raise. We've seen a string of incidents in communities I represent, notably St. Thomas, where people on bail for serious offences commit other identical offences. And police have been throwing their hands up in the air, incredibly frustrated with this, because they've been calling for legitimate reforms to laws. And in the cases of Bill C-16, we know that bad bail laws hurt women. We know that bad bail laws hurt children. Bad bail laws hurt people that are very vulnerable to these particular crimes. And I think that's why we are standing up and, again, hoping to work across party lines to fix some of these core issues facing our society and our legal system.
Yeah. Questions and comments, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yeah, first, Mr. Speaker, be very clear. We don't have the new bail laws because the Conservatives refused to pass it last year. That's the reason why we don't have the new bail laws today. But let's go on to the mandatory minimums. These are laws that the member opposite tries to say we need more of. That's exactly what this legislation does. It puts in additional mandatory minimum laws. Now, the safety is the issue, the safety clause, as he refers to it. Here's what the member from Thompson Nicola, his Conservative colleague, has to say. The Liberal government could make this constitutional by by adding a safety valve. That is, by having a mandatory minimum with the exception to address the very issue that the Minister of Justice has addressed. This is a perfect middle ground. Why will the minister not accept it? We've accepted it. Why won't the rest of
The Honourable Member for Elgin St. Thomas, London South.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to clarify this, Mr. Speaker, because I think that well, let me take a step back here. We tried in December at the Justice Committee 19 times to allow the government to let us focus on Bill C-14, to allow them to let us focus on bail. And the Liberals on the Justice Committee were actually denying that while that very member was speaking in this House of Commons saying, man, why isn't the Justice Committee focusing on bail? We tried. Finally, we were able to today break that impasse, set aside the divisive Bill C-9 to focus on Bill C-14. Again, if C-16 is coming before the Justice Committee soon, this is also an issue that we agree is very important. But I note that we should not be taking our cues from the courts on matters that are so very clear to members of this chamber and to Canadians. We are the ones responsible. We have a tremendous honor to be in this chamber. I haven't been here as long as that member has, but I appreciate the honor it is to be here and actually be able to respond to the concerns from Canadians on justice.
Question et commentaire, le député de Rivière-du-Nord.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, mon collègue nous dit que 19 fois, il a demandé à travailler sur C-14, sur les mises en liberté conditionnelles. En tout respect pour mon collègue, qui est habituellement un homme de bonne foi, ce propos-là m'apparaît de mauvaise foi, parce que les 19 fois en question, ce qui était demandé, et j'étais là, je le sais, ce qui était demandé, c'est de cesser notre étude de C9, le projet de loi sur la haine. Les conservateurs ne voulaient plus qu'on travaille sur le projet de loi qui traite de la question de la haine parce qu'ils voulaient qu'on aille sur C-14. Mais la job du comité, c'est de les étudier tous, les projets de loi, de voter sur chacun de ces projets de loi-là. C9 comme C-14 comme C-16. Alors, ma question, Monsieur le Président, pour mon collègue, peut-il me garantir que ses collègues et lui, que le Parti conservateur est de bonne foi et qu'à partir de maintenant, le filibuster du comité justice va cesser et que les conservateurs vont accepter de travailler avec nous. Ils voteront comme ils voudront, pour ou contre, mais qu'ils vont accepter de travailler plutôt que d'empêcher le comité de fonctionner. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The Honourable Member for Elgin St. Thomas, London South, in about 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't even think I need that much, but I'll just say thank you very much for your great work, and it's good to see you after a lengthy winter break here. I will say to my honourable colleague that Conservatives always stand ready in good faith to deal with the actual criminal justice priorities of Canadians. We've been saying that since the Justice Committee was convened. I've been saying it since I was placed on the Justice Committee, and we've been saying it as the Justice Committee has worked through legislation, including the bill the member opposite raises, which Canadians have been clear they do not want. So We stand in good faith, as always, to deal with the real criminal justice priorities of Canadians, and I'm glad we're finally moving forward in that vein. I welcome the Liberals to the team that we've been on for a while, which is the team that wants to get serious about bail.